If you're relying upon the person living with HIV to tell you, then how are you avoiding HIV in the context of people who don't know? Right? They're HIV positive, they don't know their status.
Yeah.
So if you're relying upon disclosure, that's actually a really bad idea from the other person.
Yeah, it is. And I'm only laughing because it's very accurate.
I think sometimes we just forget that we're still human beings. Yeah, I think it's important that everyone should know their status. Knowing your status is the first step to really kind of having that conversation. I think it's important we learn how to tackle stigma and get rid of it. I think it's such an extremely amazing thing that I get to do this every day and meet such great people and learn their story and share some of their story with the people that watch us every day. To remember to stay hopeful in victory.
Good morning. Welcome back. This is Hopeful in Victory, and guess what? This is Dusty Lion. So before I go ahead and continue, let me give you a dab to that coffee. Bing! Oh, wait. Bing! Let me get my right tone.
Just on water.
Well, we can dab the water. That works perfect too.
Bing.
I have Scott Schoettes, and he's going to be talking with us about HIV criminalization laws here at Lambda Legal. So Scott, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Scott Schoettes, as you said. I am the HIV Project Director and Counsel here at Lambda Legal. I have been in this role for about I've been in this specific role about 10 years, but I've been at Lambda Legal for going on 12 years. And here at Lambda Legal, we do impact litigation and policy work and education on the rights of LGBT people, and then specifically people living with HIV. And as the HIV Project Director, I'm in charge of all of our work across the country regarding the rights of people living with HIV. I'm also openly HIV positive myself. Been living with HIV since...
I didn't know that. Sorry, I'm going to respond because I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No.
Oh, yeah. So I've been living with HIV since 1999, and it's just a helpful thing for people to know about me when I'm doing my work. I think it gives me an insight into the work and the lives of the people that on whose behalf I'm working. That is helpful.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm like, you guys know me. I'm such a gag when I see when I know someone who's HIV positive, and I'm just like, oh my god, yes, another person who's positive, because I guess I don't know too many who are positive or who disclose and can.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's that we probably know more people who are HIV positive than we realize. We just don't know very many people who are openly HIV positive. And I tell people all the time, it is still a political statement in this day and age to be open about your HIV status, and it really speaks to just how severe and pervasive the stigma is around HIV, that people are still so very quiet about it. Yeah.
So I wanted to go ahead and I know you gave us a little bit about yourself, but tell me a little bit of the work that happens here at Lambda Legal before we jump into. I have my cheat sheet that he gave me, guys.
So do you want to work about HIV in particular, or about the work of Lambda Legal more broadly?
I'm gonna keep correcting myself because I have such a bad speech impediment. But Lambda Legal, if I said that right?
Yes.
Broadly. If we can talk about the work that they do in a more broader sense.
Yeah, so the stuff that people are probably most familiar with with respect to Lambda Legal is the marriage equality work that took place recently and was a big important change in this country. Lambda Legal has been heavily involved in that for years, was heavily involved in it in its run up to the Supreme Court, had one of the cases that was a part of the Obergefell cases. People sometimes don't realize, but that was actually 4 or 5 cases that the court was deciding when it decided Obergefell. Yeah. And so Lambda was counsel on one of those cases, but had been doing work in this area for years. Established the right to same-sex marriage in Iowa, which was a huge deal, and really the first state in the Midwest that allowed.
Leap.
Yeah, and that was all a result of the work of my some of my brilliant colleagues here at Lambda Legal who really chose Iowa and decided to make it the place where this was going to happen. It was very strategically done and I think kind of brilliantly done. But prior to that, I would say Lambda Legal, the most famous case that Lambda Legal has is Lawrence v. Texas, which was the case that struck down the sodomy laws across the United States. So finally we got rid of the laws that criminalized people engaging in same-sex sexual activity. And there were still, I think, 11 or so states that criminalized that activity when it was struck down in 2003. So that's a kind of work we do. We do work on behalf of youth in out-of-home care.
I'm sorry,
in addition to some of that headline work, if you will, that we're most well known for. We do work on behalf of youth in out-of-home care. We do parenting work, right, ensuring the rights of same-sex couples who are parenting, and that kind of family work. We do work in the employment context, so ensuring the rights of LGBT people in the employment context.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm missing stuff that I will regret later on, or my colleagues will say something.
We'll share it here as well.
Exactly.
We'll show that for me. Like I'm just sitting here and I'm like, got my highlighter. I'm like, oh my God, we need to talk about this and this and this and this. So
and this is available online, so we should make sure that people are aware if they want to see the whole thing.
Yes.
That they can go to our website and find this, and maybe you can provide the link.
Yeah, I will put the link in the description. So you guys, if you want to see what we're going to be reading off today and what we're going to be talking about today, that link is in the description. Go ahead and click it, and I might just put it on the screen so you can just like click the button, but then you won't get to see the video. So I'm gonna put it in the description. So just go there, okay? So the first thing I actually wanted to dive into was these laws. They harm the public health. And the one that really caught my eye was it may actually actually reduce disclosure. So when we talk about reduced disclosure, are we thinking of people not just telling their status?
Yeah, so it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? I mean, the people who passed these laws thought that they were going to be increasing disclosure, right? You put a criminal penalty on non-disclosure, that means you're going to increase disclosure. Well, the fact is there's no proof that actually happens. That
fear doesn't work.
Right. There's no... Right, exactly. And in fact, there are some reasons to believe that it may actually decrease disclosure. So, first of all, some people just think, well, if no one knows about my status, if I just don't tell anyone, then I couldn't be prosecuted under these laws. Yeah. So I'm just going to be quiet about my status. I'm going to keep it to myself, which we know is actually not good for the individual. It's actually helpful to be able to share that information, to be able to gain resources by revealing your status.
Moral support.
The support that you need, all that stuff. So that's bad just by itself. Then there's other situations where, so imagine this. You go on a date, or you have a hookup, and you have some type of sexual contact. It could be sexual contact through which there's very little risk of transmission, right? Like oral sex,
deep kissing,
right? But kissing, or people don't realize, but they have not. Like, if there is a risk through oral sex, it's really, 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 really low. And really only in the context of like someone having trauma in their mouth, prior to the oral sex. But whatever, you have some type of sexual activity and your HIV status didn't come up, and you didn't bring it up. But now you're going to have a second encounter with this person, right? And now maybe you're having some type of more, intimate contact, right? Or contact that actually involves some degree of risk. So yeah, that's a way in which it actually, I think, works against the very goals that they're supposed to be working toward.
And I wanted to add on that too, because when you brought up dating, I was like, oh God, remember that time I went on a date? If you guys don't notice, like, this is not even on my wrist. It's like somewhere on my arm. Like, that's my wrist, right? My forearm.
Your forearm.
Yeah.
You got to turn though. You can't see it.
But look at it, like that's my forearm, where you can't even tell the tattoos there. But if I turn my arm all the way, if you guys see, I have like a cross there. And I actually went on a date, and like I didn't disclose at all, but like that being theirs, and he was just like curious, like, oh, like what does that tattoo mean? And I'm just like, oh, it means I'm HIV positive, which is nice because it's always an easy segue to talk about yourself, like a tattoo, which is always nice. And I told him, and he was just like, oh, like, well, I'm glad you told me like now versus like later. I'm like, well, I would have told you regardless. Like,
yeah. Well,
but we're not gonna go on the second date, so let's not even get an order in. Let's just get some drinks and then we can just call it a night.
Wait, so it ended up ending the date?
Yeah, because he was very he's very close-minded. I'm not gonna like reveal or anything like that, but he was just very close-minded about it because it actually segued into like how he feels about disclosing, and he thinks that like people should just like have like some sort of like tattoo or some sort of like signage on them or about them on their card that says that they are HIV positive, because people tend to hide their status.
It's at the very root of these laws, right? This idea that somehow people living with HIV have an obligation to disclose their status. And I would argue strongly that we do not have an obligation to disclose our status. That is not how people should be. That's not how you engage in safer sex practices, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you're relying upon the person living with HIV to tell you, then how are you avoiding HIV in the context of people who don't know, right? They're HIV positive, they don't know their status.
Yeah.
So if you're relying upon disclosure, that's actually a really bad idea from the other person's
perspective. It is. And I'm only laughing because it's very accurate. It's like, well, know your status too as well. But also, you just can't rely on just this, because disclosing, you don't want people who are HIV positive to bring harm to other people, but at the same time, disclosing is just not that plain.
It's not that easy.
Yeah.
That's right. And people don't actually know how to integrate the knowledge. So given all that we know about HIV today, and what it means to have a suppressed viral load, and what that does, it essentially makes it impossible to transmit HIV. People aren't able to take in that information, it seems, and really integrate it into their thinking. So if they find out that someone's HIV positive, that will often just take that person off the list, when there are other things that would actually should be more pertinent or relevant.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, they should want to know if the person who thinks they're HIV negative, how many times they've had sex since their last HIV test. Whether any of those encounters were without a condom. Those things are much more pertinent than, for instance, my HIV status. I have an undetectable viral load. I've had an undetectable viral load for the past 20 years.
Yay! Undetectable.
and so knowing that about me that's not really useful information. The fact that I'm HIV positive. The things you should want to know in terms of risk in terms of sexual encounter with me is about my other conditions. Yeah. Other sexually transmitted infections.
That are becoming
more prevalent and stronger, right?
Yeah.
More resistant to treatment. So that's, I think, one of the biggest problems is we place so much emphasis or importance on this one particular piece of information. You're HIV positive or you're not, and it is not justified by what the risks actually are.
I agree with you. I don't want to sit too much on the topic because we have like a lot of other things I want to touch on. But our second one, and it kind of plays into our first topic, was the alienation of patients from care.
It alienates people from their providers. And the biggest concern in terms of the HIV criminalization laws is often the providers themselves are called upon to provide information about this individual in order to prosecute them under these laws. So there are providers who've been put on the stand so that they can learn from that provider, like when the person tested positive, if the person knew.
No, wait, don't they have a duty to like withhold
Yes.
like private information to the public?
Yeah. So there is a patient doctor-patient privilege, right? That is designed to protect this information. However, there are exceptions to that privilege. And one of those exceptions is often the criminal law. So if there's a criminal prosecution, then they can often overcome the doctor-patient privilege. We do want doctors to try to assert that privilege as appropriate and protect their patients from having that information disclosed. But, you know, oftentimes they'll be able to go in and get that doctor, get that healthcare provider, and put them on the stand and ask them questions. So it creates this really horrible dynamic where now a provider is actually providing information that could put their patient behind bars. And we want to avoid that. We want to actually, you want to create a relationship between a provider and a patient that is very open, right? Where that patient's going to feel like they can speak to their provider about their sexual practices, about the risks they're taking, about you know, all types of different aspects of their lives, including their sex lives, and not to be afraid that somehow that information is going to come back to bite them in the butt.
Yeah.
Can I say? Can I say ass?
You can say ass.
Okay, bite them in the ass.
We're
later.
fine, yeah. No, like I agree with you because like I was talking to my provider and I'm like at first I'm like like this is weird. Like I don't want to talk about my sex life. Like I have a hard time talking about my sex life with my mom and that's. And friends sometimes too, but like when it's your provider, like if you don't have that sense of comfort before even thinking about like the protection of your privacy, I think if it's a matter of just your personal comfort of it, that like draws that thin line. But how about I just tell them all this information because they're trying to help you. They're trying to help you and protect you.
Yeah, it's so important to have to develop that relationship with a provider where you feel comfortable sharing. I mean, as a society in general, we are so sex phobic. And people have so much trouble just talking about sex. I know personally, like I find it important to have I want a gay man as my healthcare provider, and that's not always going to be possible. I just sorry to interrupt you. You switched?
Yeah. I'm switching. I'm looking for a provider who's gay or homosexual who understands some of the things or experience that I go through in my life and able to talk about that.
Super important, and probably not easy to find in some communities, right? I mean, I recognize my privilege in this regard, in that I live in a big city where I can find any number of gay men who are doctors. But to the extent you can, or find someone that you can talk about those things with, because you need to be able to do that.
You do, indeed.
Yeah.
And I want to read off that. Future Dion. This is Pat Dion talking to you. So put this at the beginning of Scott's statement, so we know what we're talking about. Information from healthcare providers is often used to prosecute, create distrust in the provider's-patient relationship, and reduce opportunities for counseling. So it's really restricting patients from a lot of resources that would benefit them tremendously. Going forward as a HIV positive person or just a gay male or a straight male, just being able to talk about your sex.
Well, and I think you mentioned this before, is that there are communities in which there's already a certain amount of distrust, right? Within the Black community, because of some historical things that have actually happened to people, there's good reason for distrust of the healthcare establishment. And so I think we need to be doing everything we can to reverse that distrust and create an atmosphere of trust. And these laws are not doing anything to help that.
Yeah, and I think it starts with really the laws and the health policies, because if we're able to change how the system is structured to work for everybody and not just a certain type of group of people, then we're able to really have a solution that works for everyone.
Lambda Legal, I would say, actually has been in this fight for a long time. But at the beginning, when we were fighting HIV criminalization stuff, we were usually involved in cases where someone was being prosecuted because they had spit at someone or had bitten someone. And those were the kinds of cases that we would weigh in on, where there was no real risk of transmission. But about 10 years ago, we really switched over and started focusing on these cases where, well, there is a risk, right, through sexual activity, but really getting at whether the laws themselves made sense, rather than just, well, was transmission possible? That's where we were previously.
Yeah.
And then we switched over into, no, we need to be taking on these laws even if there is a risk and showing how they are unjust. So that's been since about 2009, 2010.
Okay. Yeah.
And, we've made some progress in a few places, but there's still lots of work to be done.
Well, you mentioned earlier, we were off camera, he mentioned that you were in California and you were doing some work over there. Are we able to talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. So
I don't want to get too much off topic, but I want to recognize the work this man is doing, you guys.
So I've been involved in several states in helping to change the laws, or there's been some states where we brought cases, like we did in Iowa, on behalf of someone who had been convicted under one of these laws, and brought what we call an impact litigation case here at Lambda. It's kind of the bread and butter of what we do. Changing the law through by bringing a case on behalf of one person that then is going to affect a whole bunch of people, which is what we did with the conviction of a guy named Nick Rhodes, and got his case reversed, and then that changed how the prosecutors in that state were going to have to, what they were going to have to prove in order to obtain a conviction. But then in other states, as well as in Iowa, we're working on changing the laws themselves and actually putting in place a law that will be much more protective of people living with HIV, and that would only result in convictions or prosecutions and convictions if the person had an actual intent to transmit HIV. So
what does that look like, intent? And we're going to go into details. What does intent look like?
Yeah, so this is a legal thing, right?
Yeah.
That the law grapples with all the time, right? So there'll be laws that you acted with the intent to kill, or etc. So first of all, let me just say that I think it is very, very, very rare that someone actually acts with the intent to transmit HIV. In all the cases that we've read about and heard about and seen, there are about 2 cases where it does appear that person had an intent to transmit HIV to someone else. So it's an exceedingly rare event. Okay. And that's what we intend to do with these laws, is make those prosecutions as exceedingly rare as the actual events where someone has that intent to harm.
Amazing.
Yeah. So to finish answering your question, is we are working on changing the laws in a number of states, and so far we've been successful and changed the law in Iowa, and the law was changed in Colorado. I wasn't as involved in that one, but in California, California had a law that was probably one of the better ones in the country when it came to this issue, but we modified it so now it's really ideal and could serve as a model for change in the rest of the country.
And that's California, correct?
That's California.
Okay.
And right now I'm working in Florida and Indiana and Ohio and Idaho and Nevada, a bunch of different places who are at different points in the process, because this doesn't happen overnight. It takes a campaign, it takes a group of people coming together around the issue to really move the ball. And so those states are in different places, but we're working in all those places, and of course, right here in Illinois.
Yeah, because I previously spoke with, depending on when this episode airs, if I'm going to put this one first or Myron's, we've talked about the current status of where Illinois is, and it's kind of like in this, it seems like it's in a gray area, if you will, kind of, we don't really know the law of the land.
Well, so yeah, Illinois is a little in this bit of a space that might be considered a little gray. One, the law was changed in 2012, so and it was improved from what it used to be. It used to be pretty bad, not that different from what Iowa's was, and so it was improved in significant ways. Then what's been in debate is sometimes what the actual effect of some of those changes is. So as advocates and as people who work on the defensive side of this, we have one idea, and I will argue quite vociferously that the law currently requires the intent to transmit HIV. Okay. But prosecutors on the other side don't seem to think that. And we haven't had a chance yet to really put this before a court to decide the issue. We tried, and we were trying to maybe affect change through, again, a case.
A case, yeah.
But given that that doesn't seem to be happening, now we are looking at going ahead and maybe changing the law again through legislation.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeez. So it sounds like, is it more effective to have change occur through a case or have law occur? Because thank you, Lola, for this, but like thinking back, like Cohen versus California, that case where it set the precedent of like free speech, like it set the precedent. So that I'm kind of getting that example in my head where you're like, okay, through a case, we can say like, this is what this needs to be for this to be a conviction.
Right.
So,
I mean, they can be equally effective.
Okay.
And I think they both have their benefits and their drawbacks, right? So, one, legislation can be, in some ways, a lot harder to make happen than getting a court to interpret something correctly, right? So there's that piece of it. Oftentimes, though, the court case will not necessarily fix the entire problem. Whereas, a legislative solution can be a little more comprehensive, and can ensure that you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's and gotten to every little bit of it. So there are benefits to both. And what's still being debated here in Illinois is whether we should reform the law to make it so that it's really hard to prosecute, or that only people who are actually have the intent to transmit are prosecuted, or whether we should get rid of the law. Now, I will tell people my view on this. I get worried about getting rid of the law because while that seems like a good idea and it seems like less sort of stigmatizing to have a law out there that specifically addresses this one condition when others aren't addressed.
One virus, the law that's on the book that
at the same time, we know there are other states where they don't have an HIV-specific law, and they still prosecute people. They just use general criminal laws. So they'll use the assault law, or assault with a deadly weapon, where HIV is the deadly weapon. I'm not joking. Where they'll use
so stupid.
Attempted murder laws. And we even had a case... Yeah. And we even had a case in Michigan where they brought it under the bioterrorism statute. Yeah. Someone who was involved in a fist fight with someone, and because he was bleeding and whatever, they tried to bring charges saying that he was trying to transmit HIV, and they charged him under the bioterrorism law.
So has that been has that gone?
They got we helped to get rid of that.
Okay.
Through
and what's the name of that case? Because I kind of want to look into that. That's what?
I want to say that's People v. Allen. It's in Michigan.
Okay, Michigan. Go back and look at that.
Yeah.
Really,
so that's a concern for me, is if we got rid of the HIV-specific law, would we end up with those kinds of prosecutions in Illinois? When you have a specific statute that deals with it, well, then you can kind of build in some protections and some bars, some things that have to be met before it would be appropriate to convict someone under that law.
Yeah. So it sounds like it would be easier, a lot of less repercussions if there wasn't that law in place. Yeah. Our third piece that I kind of wanted to go to is this creates a disincentive to HIV testing. That some people who are HIV positive not going to get tested, or people who don't know what their status is. They don't want to go get tested even though they may think that they've been exposed to the virus, only because if they do find out, then maybe they have to, they're more likely to be prosecuted, or if they were to disclose after finding out. Is that correct? Yeah. So it creates a disincentive to people learning their status, right? Because if you don't know your status, you can't be prosecuted under these laws. That's the way they work. Yeah. So just knowing your status is sort of the first element. And for some people, first of all, I should preface this by saying about 1 in 7 people living with HIV in this country does not know that they're living with HIV.
So it's a significant, number of people.
Yeah, it is.
We think there are approximately 1.1 or 1.2 million people living with HIV in the United States, and about 14% of them don't know that they're living with HIV.
Yeah.
So, so for those folks who have HIV but don't know it, I could see, especially if they think they don't have access to care.
That was running in my head. I'm like,
right?
I want to jump at it.
So oftentimes I think when we talk to legislators about this, it doesn't make sense to them. They're like, well, of course you'd go and get tested. Why would you wouldn't let these laws stop you from getting tested, because you get tested and then you get treatment and then the disease doesn't kill you. But what they don't realize is that some people don't have access to care or don't think they have access to care. And so just knowing their status isn't that helpful to them. But that's what they believe. The fact is that there are ways that people can get access to HIV-related treatment in this country. So there are people from certain communities who are policed, right, more heavily, that are going to have a greater fear around having an additional reason why law enforcement could lay hands on them or get up in their business.
Increase that risk, yeah.
Right.
I was gonna say, like, if we have that as a disincentive, would an incentive be in a sense of like, if you do know your status, you won't be prosecuted. That's very general to say, but like in the ideal world, if people were to get checked or get their status checked or get tested, and they know if they're negative or positive, then we can get them on treatment. We can get them into care. And because we're able to do that, we have like that first step. And if they're taking that initial step into that, shouldn't there be some sort of like gateway program where it's like, because you're doing this, like
actually, interesting, because I think that the way that we are suggesting these laws be rewritten, modified, is to make the fact that someone is in treatment make it impossible to prosecute that person. We also don't want people who aren't in treatment to be prosecuted either, but it's sort of like a fail-safe. Like, if you are in treatment, well, then you can't really have the intent to transmit, right? Because if you have the intent to transmit, why would you want to reduce your viral load, right, to a place where you can't transmit? So those two things are antithetical. So that's what we are trying to include in the law, is to create an incentive, in a way, to know your status and to be in treatment. So
that's a good step too.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to go ahead and like jump to our third section, where we kind of talk about the stigma and the oppression. Stigmatized and oppression, because we actually touched on that here in the disincentive portion. Especially not disincentive. Yeah, disincentive, where some communities don't have access to certain treatment. Some people are fortunate to have access to PrEP, free testing, things like that. And some communities just don't have offices. They have to maybe travel 100 miles or a couple of miles outside of the town just to get that treatment. So I wanted to go ahead and talk about how this further affects people who are already oppressed and who are disproportionate when it comes to their counterparts when it comes to resources.
Yeah.
So we talk about the oppressed, already marginalized population, and the one thing I highlighted was sex workers are made felons. And so I want to dive into that specific topic within the oppressed community.
Yeah, so there are, as you say, various parts of the community that I think are already oppressed, and then these laws make life worse. And so sex workers are one of those groups. Now, in some states, Illinois is not one of them, but in some states there are specific laws, and California had these, we got rid of them, that took, if you were a sex worker and you were picked up for engaging in sex work, one, you'd be tested for HIV. And then if you were subsequently, so let's say you tested HIV positive.
Okay.
Then if you were subsequently picked up for sex work, then you would be charged not as a misdemeanor, like sex work normally is, but it would be charged as a felony.
Oh.
Yeah.
And that's because they are HIV positive.
Exactly. So it would change that normal misdemeanor charge for sex work, which that's another entire topic I'd be happy to go into about how we're opposed to the sex work laws and how getting rid of the sex work.
Well, that's why I
laws.
like, 'cause I'm like that's kind of like a kind of huge topic too as well.
Yeah, like so I firmly believe that if we got rid of the sex work laws, we would improve our ability to address HIV and other health conditions among sex workers. I mean, it just makes sense if you are not if you're not sort of underground and living in the underground economy, then you are more likely to be able to access care and treatment and just a whole bunch of things. But in addition, there is this problem with these laws, and they actually single out people with this one health condition and don't take into account whether that person has an undetectable viral load, whether they're using a condom, whether there's any real risk presented, and just punish them more severely as a result of their HIV status.